Okay.
Jahnvi, I am excited to have you on the show today.
I'm excited to be here.
Yay.
Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you. We'll explore the topic of belonging. And I already got a little glimpse during the Never Done Before workshop that you contributed together with Sarah. So yes, more than excited. And before we're getting there, I always start with the same question. Jahnvi, when did you cut?
Gordon.
Gordon. Jahnvi, when did you start calling yourself a facilitator?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that question quite a lot because I feel like I've been hosting experiences and just gatherings all my life since I was very young. I remember a childhood in Delhi where I would work with my friends to invite people in our colony and other children to plays and dinners and parties. But in 2015, um, I had already been building an experience as an arts and cultural manager, as a designer, someone crafting some kinds of experiences for people and taking them through it and guiding them through it. But it was when I got in touch with an organization called Flow India. Um, who were an education consultancy, and they were looking for freelance facilitators. And while I didn't know what that title meant, a lot of what they said, we want somebody who's passionate about culture and the arts and someone who will be happy to lead learning journeys and programs around culture and how we build our identity and learn skills through culture and the arts. And I was like, oh, that sounds like me. And it was in my first conversation with them that I said, oh, this is interesting. What does it mean to be a facilitator? And they said, well, remember, you're not a teacher. You're working with teachers and students, but you're not a teacher. You're not going to impart any knowledge. Of course, if you have something, you will share it, but you will just be taking the learners on a path. And that path is going to unlock an opportunity for them to make sense of where we are and whatever we're facing together. And I just thought that was the most amazing job description I'd ever heard. And I, of course, joined the organization. And over the years, while that was in India, I have moved across the world, but I still work with that organization and call myself a learning designer and facilitator till date.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And it sounds as if it's not only an amazing job description, but also an amazing definition of what a facilitator is.
Yeah, I feel like I've had to do quite a lot of that. A lot of our work, so the work I was doing with Flow India previously, was with and still is with schools. How do we inspire young learners to start learning outside their classrooms and learn beyond the textbook? To use the city and our art, our communities as inspiration and sources for learning wherever we are. And a lot of the projects and the programs I would design keeping in mind that I'm not going to be with these learners all the time. It's the teachers and the educators who work with them who are going to eventually build that skill even more. And so for me, it was very important to understand that difference because what we're doing is we're creating that space. And so in my interactions with educators in learning environments, we would have these conversations on what is facilitation, that you're already facilitating, but how that might be different from just teaching.
Interesting. And I find it intriguing that as the designer creator of this learning experience, you then basically have to design for two customers or clients, who are the educators who will facilitate the educational journey, but also for the participants.
Absolutely. A good experience, any experience, whether learning experience, a gathering that we're participating in, just living life is just full of all these networks and interconnections. No system exists without all these different individuals bringing all of themselves into it and helping shape it. So absolutely, I loved how you said that but it's not just two clients, it's many more. The people who make a learning experience what it is are, the people who create it, the people who are learning in it, the people who are going to take it forward long term, the people who bring their expertise into it to spark imaginations and new knowledge. So yeah, there are loads of people within that, and that's what I find most exciting about this role of being a learning designer, who facilitates interactions between all these different stakeholders and inspirations and people.
Hmm. And you mentioned that today you rather focus on hosting. So where do you see the difference between facilitating and hosting a group?
Oh, that's that's a hard question. I feel okay. So this is a very personal understanding of both these ideas. I think we're all always facilitating, whether ourselves or others, and we're all constantly hosting also, um, whether ourselves in our bodies or others in our homes, or and so I think personally for me, facilitation is um, akin to supporting. So, and we were speaking about this before also, which was how every learning experience or any situation has something similar to a script. There is a certain structure that one wants to follow, a goal that we set for ourselves, and a series of checkpoints on a path that will help us reach that goal. And that movement, and supporting others through that path, is what a good facilitator does. But but a host is, to me, something bigger. A host is someone who um, brings the framework or the goal and the path in view, but then participates along with everyone else. It's the party analogy, right? Like you go to a party, you're hosting someone in your home, but you're as much a part of the gathering and the enjoyment as everyone else.
Mm. Thank you for pointing that out. I always had the impression that a facilitator has kind of a goal in mind or an endpoint where he or she wants to bring the group towards, and that a host is rather the presence and the being without a specific goal. And I do like your perspective on it, that it's the emergence. And maybe this brings us directly to the topic of today's show of belonging. Because for me, a facilitator creates belonging for others in the best of all cases, but never belongs
Mm.
to what we create. So let's start at the beginning. What is your concept of belonging. And when was it? How did you find your way into, how did it trigger your interest?
Oh, yeah. Well, belonging is that elusive feeling, isn't it? That we're all somewhere aware of at the back of our minds since the day we're born. But it's the giving form to it, giving a word to it, and adding it to your everyday lexicon that really ignites it and brings it to life. Um, so I'll actually answer your second question first, which was what brought me into or what brought that hyper awareness to belonging for me. So as I was mentioning, I was born and raised in India, and I moved in 2017 out of my home with my partner, and as a migrant, so I moved to the US, and now I'm settled in the UK, finding my home, figuring out who I am in this new place. I am Indian, I'm bilingual. I love arts and culture and play, and you know, I love my family. I love food. I love cooking. I love festivals and dancing and singing. Um, but what do all those things mean in this new place around these new people? Um, and as I was navigating those questions over the last 4 years, a lot of questions of home and belonging were thrown up for me. Um, I'm also a millennial, trying to find my community of peers and work that aligns with the values and the vision for the world that I want to see. How am I doing that online? So there were so many questions that were coming up. And especially, I moved to the UK right before the pandemic.
Mm.
And that intensified those questions a lot more, especially when one doesn't have the opportunity to form new connections with people and to sense my way through this newness as I was able to do previously. Um, and there was a moment in the middle of lockdown last year when I just felt very disconnected and isolated with everyone and everything around me. Um, and there was a part of myself which said that this is not who you are, this is not what you want to be doing, and just going down this spiral is not going to be very helpful. And I had a conversation, a chance conversation with someone on an online networking platform um, about homes. And they said, oh, yeah, I move all the time. I'm a what we call a digital nomad.
Mm-hmm.
And, and every time I move to a new city or a new place, I figure out my rituals of belonging. And that just sparked this whole other line of questioning in me that, oh, how can I have more of these conversations? And what are my rituals of belonging? And how am I making sense of this new place digitally, but also in person? And that's when I um, approached an organization called Enroll Yourself, which is based in the UK. It's an award-winning social enterprise that brings lifelong peer learning to people. And they have created this model called the Learning Marathon, which is a 6-month learning journey that peers go on together while asking their learning questions and creating their questions into project, but just by supporting each other. And I just thought that structure was something so in line with what I wanted to do, but also I wanted to create my community of belonging, people who I could ask those big questions with. Um, and so that's what I did. I started reaching out to the world. I barely knew people in the UK, but I knew a lot of people around the world. So I started reaching out and saying, hey, I'm collecting a community of people who are asking, what does belonging mean to them? And who wants to join me? And yeah, and beginning of this year, I started my learning marathon with a community of peers, and that's the question we've all been asking. um, and so what is belonging to me? I think I've had many conversations as part of my own learning journey. This again draws to the host and facilitator relationship, because I'm the host of this community, but not the facilitator. We are all facilitators in turn.
Mm.
So we have a goal in mind, which is the end point of the journey, what we want to achieve, what the checkpoints are, but we are all on the journey ourselves. Um, and so I've also been asking my own questions and speaking to people about belonging, how we build it for ourselves, what rituals we use, how are we curating our sense of belonging. And this is what I and we as the group have come to, that belonging is a feeling of safety, um, of having that sense of control, of being free from harm, um, of comfort, of being relaxed and having that peace of mind to be excited about taking risks, um, of feeling not just accepted but respected.
Mm.
Understanding the differences between ourselves and the different identities that we all hold within ourselves, but also acknowledging who we are, accepting it, and not only respecting ourselves but all of the other individuals we interact with. And finally, feeling valued, of being loved, of feeling important to someone, of not being control, of again going back to that, having that sense of control. So it's belonging is an intangible feeling, but it throws into sharp relief when we feel unbelonging. Um, and I think that's the essence of belonging, that it is in the connections, a deep and resonant connection with ourselves and the world that we inhabit. So people, communities, places, our purpose. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing the entire journey and the concept of belonging. And I'm intrigued because when I put my facilitator's hat on, and I think of belonging, then I think of how can we create a sense of belonging for a group. From what I hear from you, belonging is something so deeply personal that either we feel it or we don't. So it's nothing that we can put upon someone. So is it actually possible to create a sense of belonging for a group? Or is it something that has to emerge that by some magic, let's say it like this? Because maybe the right people are coming together by a shared identity or by a shared interest. And therefore belonging creates automatically. But can you create it?
I love your analogy to magic, because in the first thing that came into my head was, oh, magic. You need a spell and you need ingredients for a magic potion, and that's what a facilitator brings, right? The ingredients and a method to stir those ingredients in a pot. But um, and I think the equivalent for a facilitator, and this is something that's emerging for me too. I don't have an answer for that really. It's just something I've been sensing along as a facilitator, as a host, as a participant on a journey on belonging. Is that what a facilitator does in any learning experience is create a space to learn. And spaces are where every individual who enters that learning experience can unlock different parts of themselves. You said very rightly, belonging is a very personal concept. It's very, very individual. But when we look at, oh, I'm losing my train of thought a bit. So Gordon, I'd appreciate just cutting out the ums and the ahs, please.
That's what he does by default. Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you, Gordon. Yeah. Right. So yes, belonging is a very personal concept. And there is a growing recognition that even in the learning space, or as we live in a society, that we are all individual human beings with our own motivations, our own inspirations, and our own life experiences that have shaped who we are. And these are the individuals coming into a learning space. So as facilitators, what we're doing is creating conditions or spaces for each of us to not only bring our individual selves in, but to acknowledge, respect, and admire each other's differences and play in the spaces in between to create a shared meaning or work together towards whatever the goal or the purpose of a workshop is. So I think how I see the role of a facilitator or holder of the space play out is to create spaces where every different kind of person can recognize or see themselves in it, find a connection with it, and move forward from a place of comfort and safety and happiness and togetherness.
It sounds to me, so I have two thoughts, and maybe they're contradicting each other. So on the one hand, I hear a place free of judgment where everyone is welcome, and that allows for the conditions for everyone to feel welcome with their identities. On the other hand, I wonder whether belonging is also defined by what does not belong. So in order to create identity for a group, isn't it also important to know, okay, what are the behaviors, identities, thoughts that actually don't belong here?
Absolutely. There is a quote by David White. And what David White says is that the moment we mention the exact dimensionality of our unbelonging, we're already on the path back to the place where we should be and want to be and dream to be in. I'm paraphrasing. This is not what he said, but the sentiment was that acknowledging what doesn't belong or how we don't belong is often the starting point for us navigating our way to our belonging. So I think when you say the word welcome, it made me think of, again, the role of the facilitator in welcoming everyone in the space to co-create the space with them. And often when I start a learning experience that is more than just one session long, it becomes important for us to set our agenda and the parameters of our space together, whether that's through a group charter or just by calling in our differences rather than calling them out.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is...
What does it mean, calling in differences instead of calling them out?
I think it's the recognition, right, that we are different, and each of us process information in different ways. Some of us are very comfortable, and I just take the example of, say, an online workshop that one is facilitating, and some of us are comfortable with our videos on, videos off. Some of us are more comfortable typing in a chat than in unmuting ourselves. Some of us are more comfortable in one-to-one conversations, say in a breakout room, than in a huge group of people adding our thoughts to the group. And that's just one part, small part of any engagement, say an online workshop. And it's recognizing and inviting in all these different ways of engagement and sense making, and knowing that all of that is welcome. And as a facilitator, steering everyone through this path together also, because I think what uh, often happens in the calling in of differences is this awareness that conflicts could come up, misunderstandings, treading on each other's boundaries that may not be very comfortable. And it's about how we navigate that exploration in the spaces of unbelonging, also in any experience.
I find that intriguing. Your example of some participants feel more comfortable with their camera off and others with the camera in. And I think that's a topic that is discussed amongst all facilitators, and it's one of the biggest, I would say, pains.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm hosting, I'm facilitating the session, this workshop, and I stare in all these black screens. And yesterday in a session, we discussed, okay, what can we actually do about that, about this annoyance? And now that I heard you speaking, I'm thinking, okay, what if it's really, what would be the impact even in a corporate workshop to calling in, as you say, the differences and say, okay, if you feel more comfortable with the camera off, that is okay. If you feel more comfortable with the camera on, that's okay too. And just by giving permission to keep it off, it might also calm our own mind as a facilitator, because I think most of the time it becomes a problem because we feel a lack of control and a lack of visual feedback. So acknowledging or speaking out the differences and that it's okay might also have a very internal effect to us when hosting.
I agree. And I think there's something in what you said, which was, when you go into an experience with a knowledge uh, an awareness of what is the expectation, um, then it just makes it easier to interact with the space itself and the people in it. So as someone who hosts learning experiences, I I've realized this over the years because I enjoyed it when it happened to me, and so I try to, maybe not perfectly so, but try to emulate it, which is just, if there are certain expectations or must-haves in a session that are going to be very important for the space, to name them right at the beginning, before people join the call. When I send introductory emails out or prep emails out, I would say, here are a few expectations. We need everyone to have their videos switched on, and this is just so that we're able to see each other, bond with each other, and following the first session, if you want to keep them off, feel free to. Or also being aware that internet is actually not great in most of the world, and connectivity drops if you have your videos on. And something we were mentioning, something Sarah said the other day in a workshop was that, while I'm showing a presentation, you don't need to have a video on, because and just as a facilitator, being aware of the learning journey as it happens before one joins the journey, during the experience, and after. And pinpointing what moments within that we actually need a video, for example, and why, and then creating that with others.
I love the example. And I would be curious about your experience, because I had the impression that the moment that the participants turned their video off, there was a piece of belonging that vanished. And it was the second time that I experienced that a facilitator, trainer, teacher said, please, let's save bandwidth for the planet, for our stability of connection, or for whatever reason. But somehow the moment we turn our own camera off, it's as if we give ourselves permission to disconnect mentally, emotionally, cognitively, or whatsoever. So this brings me into this puzzle that on the one hand, yes, it might be nice to invite participants and give them permission. On the other hand, I think if we are too broad with the permission, if we make it the rule, then we might break something. And this was for me the learning from this. If you're calling it out, please everyone turn your camera off, be aware that you might destroy something. Whereas if some people decide that they want to turn it off, then it's okay, you don't need to call them out.
Absolutely. I think that's where, again, as a facilitator, as the holder of the space, it's very important to go into the space with a clear understanding of what's the purpose. I'm a big fan of Priya Parker and all the art of gathering and all of her resources, and it's very important to think about the purpose of our experience or the gathering. Why are we here? If it is to if connection is a big part of it, then that needs to be communicated and explored with everyone. I completely agree with you. I think when I'm told that, oh, feel free to switch your camera off, and I switch it off, then I do sometimes give myself the permission to maybe, if I have my headphones on, to walk to the kitchen and make myself a cup of tea, or to look out of my window, which I often do in workshops, and not feel like I'm being watched. But I think that's where a bit of the co-creation of the space comes in. What might it look like for us to actually ask people that, how would we feel if people were to switch their videos off? Explore that together and have that awareness, or to come up with methods that we're more comfortable with. And I think you touched upon this, and something that we did in our Never Done Before session was the welcoming exercise. And it's about welcoming all parts of ourselves in. We might want to switch our video off because we are extremely tired and our eyes are closing and our hair's all over the place, and or we have children running around, or I'm caring for someone and I may not feel comfortable having my video on at that point. But is there benefit in spending some time welcoming all parts of ourselves into this space, including the spaces we're in, the people who are surrounding us, dogs barking, horns honking, and knowing that all of that has its place and not to worry. So it's a lot of sense making together, because we can't assume why someone would want their videos off, but at the same time, inviting everyone to explore together. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm actually excited to do that now the next time.
Yeah, and I wonder what would it take in the welcoming and creating the space to have more people turning their video on, because at the end of the day, that my hair is not done, nobody will realize, nobody even cares a part of myself. So it takes part of the headspace, all this kind of inner dialogue and judgment of how do we look like. And I think for me, that's the beauty of this online space, that we do have a view inside someone's personal surrounding, that can then create even more belonging, because we see that everyone is human.
Absolutely. Yes.
Do you have a particular exercise that you enjoy doing in order to create belonging, or?
Well, yeah. So there are lots of different things, of course. Um, I think there are two exercises that I do. One is an exercise for myself, um, in preparation for the learning experience, and and of course many others during the workshop itself with other participants. Um, and this was what I do with myself is, so Sarah and I facilitated the Never Done Before um, workshop on building spaces of belonging in the digital space. Um, and as part of that, I created a framework of the 4 spaces of belonging. And they are spaces of rest, a space where people can express themselves and who they are, a space of playing with other people, and a space of action where we know that we can contribute and make meaning together. And so what I do is I make sure that every experience I design, once I have the salient features in place, I see what moments of all 4 spaces I am creating, to give everyone a choice. So whenever one wants to rest, is there, say, a breakout room for them to rest in? Is there, how are we inviting everyone's feeling of home and their identities into the space, and how are we playing with each other and making meaning together? So that's something I do for myself. And with other people, I think um, there are 2 exercises again. One I did with the Never Done Before group who joined us for the workshop, which was the extended welcome. And this is a tool that I had come across again. My peers at Enroll Yourself had introduced me to it. It's something called the Diversity Welcome by Training for Change. And it's just 10 minutes at the beginning of a session to welcome all parts of every person who is in this space. Um, and I think what's really important about the diversity welcome is that it doesn't assume that the facilitator dictates what parts of ourselves are welcome. The facilitator starts by naming everyone, saying that people of all genders, from all kinds of places, are welcome in this space, welcoming the way our bodies are welcoming, whether we are single or in relationships or situationships, welcoming all those who supported ourselves to be here, welcoming all those, all the religions that we might follow or not follow, welcoming the languages we may speak or want to speak in. And then the facilitator passes on and holds the space for anyone else to welcome any parts that have not been welcomed in yet. And that space, I think that space where the facilitator switches and invites everyone else to welcome people, welcome parts that have not even been imagined yet, is beautiful. And then we hold the welcome together for 10 minutes and take a few breaths and then move on with the rest of the session.
Yeah, it was indeed an intense moment, and it was beautiful, especially with your voice and with your calm, and you could see in the faces that everyone was a little bit inward, and still there was some voice inside of me thinking, aren't we, if we try to include everyone, we, as much as we become aware of all the diversity, which is, I guess, the goal of the entire exercise, we're also then maybe more sensitive of who is suddenly excluded because not mentioned. So I think then suddenly it becomes a very thin line. And yes, of course, you're inviting at the end, okay, whoever you want to also invite in the space. So it was an interesting experience to see also the reaction of myself, the other participants, to this inclusion and invitation to really everyone. This kind of taking 10 minutes, which is a long time for a workshop, to just create awareness of all these differences. And then at one point I was like, what if we just created awareness of what we all have together? But maybe this is ignoring the important fact that we're all different.
Yes, I think we all have a lot in common. But those common grounds, those common spaces, we're entering from our unique standpoints. And what I find very powerful about the diversity welcome is that, again, it's an indicator of the kind of space we're creating here. The space that I wanted to create for the learning experiences I run, but also for that workshop that we did together, was one where all parts of ourselves could feel like, okay, I am invited in. If I am feeling, because as I was mentioning, belonging, that sense of belonging is quite closely tied to, do I feel acknowledged and heard and seen? And I think the diversity welcome is just a beginning. To, oh, we felt like all of that is being called in, but what is tying us together? And that kind of sparks an exploration of that.
And it's, I think I could just put my finger on what it was that made me also feel uncomfortable. And I think one part, and why it is too important. So I think a discomfort came from the fact that I'm a privileged white European still young woman. And everything that I could be discriminated for, like having Jewish family, nobody can see it, right? So then with pointing out all these diversities, and I'm heterosexual, right? And I consider myself as a woman, and I was born in a female body, right? So then suddenly I feel so normal. They were like, oh, what am I doing in this? So suddenly kind of doubting, and this is, I'm just speaking out loud, and it's maybe oversharing too much information. But well, they're just the two of us and a few listeners. On the other hand, why I think that it's still important that, well, this discomfort might be important just as such, to get a feeling for all those who don't feel fitting in because they don't have all the kind of features that are usually
The
or that
visible
used to be
markers.
included. Yeah. And the other thing is that if we would, as I suggested a few minutes ago, point out what we have in common despite our differences, then we are not raising awareness of the misunderstandings that might come along with this hypers or overconfident. Oh, we have so much in common. We're all human and we all care about belonging. We're all facilitators and blah, blah, blah. And still there will be misunderstandings. So I think it's easier to pave the road for having curiosity for each other and understanding, and then rather ask the question instead of assuming that we know when before we were primed on all these differences.
Absolutely. I hear you. And there's something about the diversity welcome again, which is that one is not indicating to anyone what our differences, individual differences are. We're just welcoming it in the space. You know what they are. You know what are the individualities. Each of us, and there's an important piece to belonging, which is understanding and accepting who I am and what I bring to the world and what I'm bringing to this space. I am bringing the fact that I am not just from India, but I am from New Delhi, from a multicultural background. I am a woman. I am heterosexual. I am a learning designer and facilitator, and I love food and I love culture. And I love talking to people, and I love creating spaces that empower people. And I love comedy films, and I sometimes feel the need to stay away from people. I call myself an introvert, and sometimes I need spaces of rest and silence more than others might need it. And and it's that acceptance, that and knowing that all of that is going to be welcomed in the space. In workshops, sometimes I felt like we all have to share, we all have to give our opinions, we all have to keep chatting or typing or unmuting ourselves. And there's that thing about performance that comes in, that I have to now either contribute or just drop out of the call.
And this brings another question to my mind, another puzzle. I didn't expect that I would run into so many internal puzzles in this conversation. Where do you draw the line between everyone and everything is welcome, and there will be a breakout space that if I need my space to recover, then I can go there, and if I want to keep my camera off, I can put my camera off, and I want to share, then I share, and then I overshare and I take all the space of all the group because I want to share. I'm exaggerating. So where do you draw the line, and where do you create then the awareness that yes, everyone and everything is welcome, but only until the limits of the comfort of the others, so to speak?
I think the limits are not around the comfort of others, but the limits are, I think, created, of course, offered by a facilitator. So for instance, I know as a facilitator of a particular session or a workshop that this is running for 90 minutes. What are the goals that I have to reach by the end of the learning outcome? So by the end of the 90 minutes, we hope to be achieving a free-flowing conversation on facilitation, belonging, and everything in between. And there are a few boundaries that I could offer from my experience, that we would like everyone to have an opportunity to contribute. So here are 5 different ways in which we will be contributing in this session. You can turn your camera, you can unmute yourself, you could type it in the chat, there's this Google board, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, you are in this space because you want to have a say. And that's what I mean, the democracy that everyone wants to build. What is democracy? Democracy is a bunch of rights that we have as individuals. So it's my right to have a space of rest, it's my right to have a space to speak about what I want. But democracy is also duties. They're the duties that we have towards each other, towards ourselves also, and to the shared purpose of this space. And as a facilitator, how am I drawing attention to what it is that we all need to achieve and to be active participants and creators of this space? And yes, so boundaries do help in facilitating this space even better. Because when we have a path, in sight, then we know what we're working towards, even if we end up taking the scenic route to that goal or we take the straight path down the road.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think defining the boundaries in the beginning of the shared rules might help. And then, how do you deal with calling someone out without risking the say? Because I have the impression that safe space, for me at least, or the space of belonging, is not having permission to do everything. So it's like a family, right? Yes, you can, we love you no matter what you do, but
absolutely,
as long as you're putting your feet under my table. Right? So how would you then adjust some people's behaviors without putting at risk all the safety and belonging that you created?
Yes. I think I love Zoom's feature of being able to message. And I'm sure there are other platforms that do, but because I've been using Zoom so much, the
every
ability
video platform is welcome.
I know every video platform is welcome, but the ability to message someone individually, and in my experience, the act of welcoming everyone to be themselves and to be just as part of creators of the space helps with that, because the onus of keeping people in check is then, or I mean, for whatever that means, is not solely on the facilitator, but it's in the freedom for anyone to come in and say, well, I wasn't very comfortable with you saying that, and then a facilitator's toolbox that has a little tool or the ingredient for conflict management and resolution, where there is, say someone misgenders someone constantly, and how do you call that in and say that, is there a, taking a path to it. Of course, if the person feels uncomfortable, they call it out themselves and say, well, this is not my gender. You're misgendering me and I don't appreciate it. And the role of the facilitator then being one of asking open questions. So if a person continues to misgender another person, do you and this was what happens. It wasn't misgendering, but it's what happened. It was that county council call where, this was last year, but it was in the UK, and I forget all the details, but there was a um, um, local official who was facilitating a call between members of the public, and somebody was just constantly stepping over them and saying that this is not what we need, and um, raising a lot of conflict in the group. And I think what the facilitator ended up doing was just deleting them from the call, or kicking them out of the call. And it became a big thing. The news was covering it, and I think a lot of facilitators and people who host gatherings started thinking about it. What does this show an example of? Is it great facilitation, or great hosting, or is it over exercise of power?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what's important, that as a facilitator, how do we recognize the needs of the space? Sometimes, and I take the misgendering example because it was something I had started with. So, sometimes we misgender people because we're just not used to it. I remember when I came from India, I was coming from a culture where being aware of gender pronouns and was not something that people paid attention to at that time. And so when I came here, it was hard for me to get used to being aware of it. But now I am. And it was through people messaging me personally and saying, oh, this is how they refer to their gender, or having an open conversation about things like misgendering, or what might happen if we had a conflict. How do we deal with it as a group, and coming up with strategies? Because again, the facilitators doesn't know everything, but what they do know well is how to bring everyone's voices in, and give them a space to thrive.
Mm-hmm. And then I think this is also the benefit of having online conversations, is that you can break them into smaller groups. Because I think at some point it's also weighing whether an individual may hijack the entire group. Because then, as nice as it is to ask open question for the one person who disturbs the entire session and is about to hijack the purpose, then at some point, I think it's also time to realign, okay, what is the purpose why we are here? What are the rules by which we want to communicate? And if someone does not feel that they belong here and want to commit to these rules, then maybe it's also their decision then to leave.
Absolutely. That makes me think of, so I used to work with an organization called the Cultural Agents Initiative at Harvard University in Boston. And as part of a pedagogy that we were implementing, this was the first time that I was introduced to this in an in-person workshop setting, which was that whenever we reflected as a group, A, we would do it in a circle, and B, there was no order. So it's not like if I begin, then the next person to speak is the person to my left.
Mm-hmm.
But anyone can speak.
Popcorn.
popcorn, but you can speak only once.
Okay. Yeah, like a
And
popcorn.
and you can only and you are then accountable for the person on your left and the right, for whether you have spoken. So again, that thing of rights and duties, that everyone must contribute, but that the facilitator is not the person calling out that, oh, you haven't spoken, oh, you haven't spoken, but it's sharing accountability and saying that just make sure the person on your left or right has spoken. Have they contributed? And then it's just a little nudge and saying, have you gone? That kind of gives people that space to get comfortable. I can come in whenever I want, but also there is a bit of accountability. And I know that people are doing wonderful things online with it also, whether it's just naming the order on the screen, the order of people on my screen, and typing it out in the chat and saying, this is how we're going to go. And that doesn't put pressure on people, but also there is knowledge and awareness that, okay, I'm supposed to come in here, and there's no sudden pressure to perform again.
Yeah. Thank you for giving this example. I think that's really helpful. According to you, what makes a workshop fail?
Something we've spoken about quite a lot, which is not setting boundaries and not welcoming people in. Because a good workshop, it happens over a certain period of time and is designed to achieve something, or has a certain learning goal or outcome at its outset. So if it doesn't achieve that, it's failed. And if everyone in that space has not contributed to meaning making, then it's not a workshop anymore. It's a class.
Yeah, good one. Thank you. I was just looking at the time and cannot just evaporated.
It has. I didn't realize that we'd already hit 1 hour 10.
If someone in the audience by some reason started mind wandering and totally lost track and just came back, I'm like, what was this about? What would you like them to remember from our conversation?
That to facilitate spaces of belonging for everyone who enters our learning spaces, and even for ourselves, we have to be mindful of how we're giving everyone a space to rest, a space to express themselves, a space to play with others and build relationships and find meaning together. Because belonging is feeling safe, feeling comfortable, feeling respected and accepted, and feeling valued. And as long as everyone in the space, including ourselves as facilitators, can feel that or has the opportunity to see that, we'll all work better together.
Wonderful. What a beautiful summary.
Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you so much for thought-provoking conversation.
Yeah. Thank you for your questions. I think we're all figuring this out all the time. And with every new community of people and ideas and moment in time that we facilitate a workshop in, that understanding keeps changing and evolving. So yeah, it was really lovely to explore all of the puzzles with you. And I think deepening my own understanding of what belonging is and what place it has in the work that we're doing.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much. And if someone in the audience would like to learn more, work with you, and find out more, I'll put all the links in the show notes.
Oh, I can't wait to get in touch and chat more about home, belonging, facilitation, everything.
Awesome. Dum, 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 dum. This is the end